You've cut back on food, you're hungry all day, but the belly fat still won't budge. Or maybe you eat well and you've even lost some weight, but the belly fat still looks the same. Well, here's the part that no one tells you. Eating less is part of why it won't shift. This is not a willpower problem, and this is the most important part of this video. Okay, instead, I want to show you how to work with the body's own pathways to get rid of that deep belly fat. So here I'm talking about the visceral fat that surrounds the heart, liver, and other organs. And we have to get this right because visceral fat isn't just extra padding that's sitting there quietly. So picture that soft fat just under your skin as a storage cupboard. It's calm. Okay, it's tucked out of the way. But visceral fat is more like a busy, leaky factory that's parked right next to your organs. And it pumps out fatty acids, inflammatory molecules, and it contributes to insulin resistance and type 2 diabetes. That is why this fat matters most of all for your health and why it behaves so differently from the soft stuff. And here's something that people find surprising. You can look lean, but still be carrying plenty of this fat inside you. So researchers even have a name for it: thin outside, fat inside. One study found that 1 in 8 normal weight women and 1 in 7 normal weight men fell into this group, which raises an obvious problem. If you can't see this fat, how do you know where you stand? Or even if any of this, what I'm going to go through in this video, is actually working. So before we go any further, let me give you a starting number, right? Now for free. So grab a tape, measure around your middle, roughly at your belly button height after you, but breathe out normally. Then compare that to your height. The simple rule that health bodies like the UK's NICE system use is this. Keep your waist to less than half your height. And if you need help to calculate this, you can use my free personalized health plan on my website. Link is below. So if you're 5 feet 8 inches, for instance, that's 68 in, you're aiming for a waist of under 34. So again, under half your height, that's it. Now, your waist is just a proxy for that deep fat. It's not a scan, of course, but it is free and it can give you a really quick way of looking at where you stand right now. And it only takes 10 seconds to get. And crucially, this is something that the bathroom scales can hide. So write down that number. And that's your before picture, the number to watch as you start to work through all of these strategies that I'm going to go through in this video. Now, here's why eating less alone can fail. So when you cut down calories, your body can fight back and it can fight back hard. So think of it like a thermostat that's set to defend your fat. So if you turn the calories down, the body will quietly turn 3 other dials to make up the difference. So it can burn a little less energy, and you might feel this by feeling a bit more cold. Then it will crank up your hunger and it will make you fidget and move less without you ever noticing. So, these 3 dials, and there are a couple of other ones, they all nudge you back to where you started. So eating less can hit a wall and it can make you miserable and hungry on the way there. Now, this is not a breakdown of willpower. I can't stress that enough here in this video. This is biology. So if starving isn't the answer, what is? Well, we want to change what you eat. So you're eating less without the hunger. This is the heart of the video without the hunger part. You don't want to just white knuckle a small dinner plate. You want to change the food. So again, you're feeling fuller on fewer calories and the calories fall without you fighting for it. So here is lever. Number 1, healthy proteins. Protein is one of the most filling things that you can eat. So for example, in 112 week, study people simply raised the amount of protein in their diet from 15% of calories to 30%, and they were told to eat as much as they wanted. And without even trying, they ate about 441 fewer calories a day, and they lost about 4 kilograms of fat. Again, no one was starving in that weight loss group. They just felt fuller, so they stopped eating sooner. You're not outwilling hunger, you're removing it. Now, please don't misunderstand me here. I'm not talking about buying protein shakes or highly processed foods that have just had a bit of protein added to them. What I'm talking about is adding in whole foods that are high in protein. And I'll explain which whole food proteins. Shortly, protein also does one more thing. When you lose weight, it can protect your muscles. So every weight loss strategy, you will lose some muscle mass. So having enough protein in your diet can help to combat that. So in a review of high protein versus standard protein diets, the higher protein group lost a little more fat and held on to more muscle. So lean towards healthy proteins such as fatty fish, and I'll explain why shortly. And another group of proteins that I advise all my inpatients to increase is legumes, things like chickpeas, lentils, and beans. Legumes have got plenty of fiber in addition to their protein. Now, this does require a bit of nuance and personalization here. So fiber, it does help to feed your gut bacteria and make you feel fuller for longer. But people with inflammatory bowel diseases such as Crohn's disease or ulcerative colitis, or even people with irritable bowel syndrome, they may need to manage how much fiber they add and how fast. So make sure to discuss with your doctor about the right amount of fiber for you and the right types of fiber. Now, after discussing fiber with your doctor, make these changes slowly. So if appropriate, slowly ramp up your fiber intake. Otherwise, you might cause things like constipation, which of course we don't. Want to do lever number 3, cut the food that makes you overeat without noticing. So some food is engineered so that you eat more of it without realizing, and food companies have got really good at designing this because, again, if we eat more of their types of foods, their profits go up. So in a tightly controlled trial, people who lived in a lab, they were offered as much as they wanted of either tray-assessed foods. So that was one group, or unprocessed foods. And both of these groups, they were matched for calories, sugar, fat, and fiber on the menu. The ultra-assessed foods diet, they ate about 500 calories more a day and gained weight. On the unprocessed diet, they lost it. So they had the same hunger, the same fullness, but 500 calories more slipped in for the ultra-assessed group. So cutting out these ultra-assessed foods removes these calories for you. Now, there's still a lot of work to be done to figure out exactly what it is about ultra-assessed foods that seems to drive this hunger. But until we figure that out, I advise my patients to avoid them and switch to whole foods instead. Lever number 4, cut out the liquid sugar. And this one is a cornerstone. So when researchers had people drink fructose, so that's the sugar commonly used in sweetened drinks, compared to glucose. So they both gained weight, but only the fructose group built up more visceral fat and more liver fat compared to the glucose group. And there's another reason why these types of drinks are the worst offender. Your body barely registers these calories that you drink. So if you eat 200 calories, you'll eat much less later to make up for it. But it appears that if you drink 200 calories, you won't. Okay, the fullness signal just doesn't seem to fire in the same way. So one of the easiest wins here from this video is to stop drinking sugar. And if you do struggle with this, that is fine. Switch to a 0-calorie option. So when researchers pulled the trials that actually had people make that swap, so trading the sugary drinks for diet ones, the diet drinks led to real weight loss, about 1 kilograms more compared to staying on the sugar drinks. And it worked just as well as switching to water. Now, a quick note about fructose and fruit. So why is fructose, which is the sugar found in fruit, bad, but whole fruits are good? Yeah. And why do I caution against fruit juice? And fruit smoothies, well, whole fruits, they don't only contain fructose. They are packed with phytonutrients, with vitamins, with minerals, and fiber. Now, when you consider the whole effect on the body of a whole fruit compared to the isolated effects of fructose drinks, it's an entirely different picture. But there's still the problem of fruit juice and fruit smoothies. So in a smoothie or a juicer, it's really easy to add, say 3 apples and a couple of bananas. Now, that is a lot of calories. Most people wouldn't eat 3 apples and 2 bananas in one sitting. But it's really easy to do that from a smoothie because you can just chug it down. So that's why I generally advise my patients to avoid fruit juice and just be really cautious about how much fruit you're actually adding into a smoothie. Okay, lever number 5 is coffee. And here's the one that did surprise me. So, in a 12-week trial, overweight adults who drank coffee, their visceral fat fell more compared to the control group, as in the group who weren't drinking coffee. But I do want to keep this in proportion because when I was looking on social media, this effect is massively overblown. Okay, so it is just one trial, and they used a specific type of coffee that was incredibly strong, several times stronger than a regular cup that you'd normally drink, and the actual clinical effect was quite small. So yes, there is an effect there, but again, I just don't want people to overestimate how much effect you'll actually see from drinking coffee. Now, one other benefit of taking coffee or drinking coffee is that they tend to have less fatty liver disease. Point is, you can still enjoy your coffee with a couple of caveats. Caffeine, it's got quite a long half life of at least about 5 hours, and that can vary quite a lot from person to person. So, a good rule of thumb is to finish your coffee intake within 4 hours of waking up so that by the time that you're trying to fall asleep at night, most of it has cleared away and it doesn't interfere with your sleep. Now, some people will say that they can have a cup of coffee before bed and they can absolutely fine. Yes, that's probably true, but your sleep quality is still affected. Plus, with coffee, you want to make sure that we're not adding sugars or other rubbish to the coffee. So, that is the plate and the cup. One more food lever, and this is the best one. It's not a single food, but the whole pattern on what is on the plate. So, this is lever number 6. Eat more plants and particularly colorful ones. In a large trial of 3 groups who ate, for 18 months, one group followed the healthy normal guidelines. Another one ate a Mediterranean style diet, and another one ate a green Mediterranean diet. So the same calories, but loaded with plants and polyphenols. So more greens, more walnuts, things like green tea, and less red and processed meats. The green group roughly doubled their visceral fat loss compared to the Mediterranean group, and it held up independent of how much weight they lost. So the same calories, but quite a different result. That is the proof that food quality matters, not just the calorie count. So push your plate more towards plants. So again, more greens, more walnuts, green tea, fewer processed meats. Now, I do want to be careful here because I'm naming green tea and walnuts as examples of this whole pattern, but it's not a magic food on their own. So green tea by itself, for instance, or walnuts by itself, the standalone evidence is relatively thin. So it's the overall plant forward polyphenol rich pattern that the trial has got behind it. And speaking of plants, there's one more exciting lead that I want to share with you. And I do want to be careful about labeling it honestly here. So there's a proposed mechanism for broccoli sprouts. So there's a couple of compounds in broccoli sprouts. So glucaraphin and myoinase. So when you eat the broccoli sprouts, those two compounds come together and they form sulforaphane. Now, sulforaphane switches on an enzyme in the body called NRF2 and in animals that can brown the fat. Okay? So it turns the storage fat into types of fats that can burn energy. So that effect was found in mice. So we don't have human trials yet to show that it does shift the visceral fat, but it's a genuinely interesting lead, and I will be reporting on it here on this channel. So that is 6 food levers, and 6 is quite a lot to hold in your head. So, let me try and collapse this whole thing into one picture. So here is the Harvard Healthy Eating Plate. So on here, it prioritizes things like colorful vegetables, which we've gone through, you know, healthy proteins such as fatty fish and legumes, water, and healthy oils. Now, on the point of fatty fish, so in particular salmon, for instance, has got a lot of omega 3s and omega 3s seem to have an anti inflammatory effect. Now, remember visceral fat, it seems to pump a whole range of inflammatory molecules. So, if we can try and dampen down some of that effect by the omega 3 intake from fatty fish, that is probably a good thing. So, food can handle the hunger, but there's one lever that can shrink visceral fat, even if the weight scale never moves. So, a huge review of 117 studies involving nearly 5,000 people pulled apart what actually shrinks visceral fat, and the answer flips everything. In the absence of weight loss, exercise is related to 6.1% decreases in visceral fat compared to diet alone. Now, the barrier that most people hit again is not willpower. Most people want to exercise. The issue is time. Most of us don't have a spare whore. So here is the good news. You don't need a spare hour. What really drives visceral fat loss is the amount of movement over the week. And you can stack that up in pieces. So for instance, don't use an elevator if you need to get up 2 or 3 floors. Walk up the stairs. Don't use an escalator. Again, use the stairs. And after you finished up an hour of work at the desk, right, get up and do a set of push-ups. So, this is exactly what I do at the clinic. In between seeing patients, we're trying to find ways to actually fit in exercise throughout our day. And this, out of all, the advice that I provide to my patients is probably the most important. So you're probably tired after work, after looking after the kids. I get it. I've got 3 kids of my own, and I'm expecting a fourth in September. Most people, after a hard day, they don't have anything left in the tank to then take themselves off to a gym, but they might want to watch a bit of TV to relax. So I advise all of my patients to buy a secondhand exercise bike. You do not need an expensive one, and set it up in the lounge. And then for about 20 or 30 minutes while you're watching TV, get on that bike and pedal. That is one of the best things that you can do for your health. 2 more free levers that most people underestimate, and one you do while lying down, and one you probably need to cut back on. So, researchers took healthy people and restricted their sleep to 4 hours a night instead of the usual amount that they were normally having. And they scanned their bodies directly, visceral fat went up, and it goes in the other way too. When people were helped to sleep longer, they ate less without being told to. And I'm sure we've all experienced this. If you've had a terrible night's sleep, junk food becomes a lot more appealing. So short sleep, it literally grows visceral fat and makes you eat more. This is a free lever. And here's one simple thing that can protect your sleep more than almost anything else. Get up at the same time every morning. That is under your control, even if you're struggling to fall asleep. And you want to do this even on weekends. The body loves to be in a rhythm, and a consistent wake time is one of the most reliable ways for optimal sleep. This is also why the coffee timing that I went through earlier in the video matters so much. And early cuff, again, it helps to clear away that caffeine and make sure that it's not interfering with your sleep. Okay. The second lever is alcohol, and this one hits you twice. So heavier drinking, it is linked to more visceral fat. So, in a large Oxford study that body scanned over 5,000 people, the heaviest drinking men, so these were men who were drinking about 24 units a week, carried more than 10% more visceral fat as a share of their body fat than men who drank below them. And that gap held even after the researchers accounted for how much total fat each person had. But there's a second reason to watch out for alcohol, and this one's solid. Alcohol, and it wrecks your sleep quality. It fragments your sleep, and it suppresses your REM sleep. So it hits you twice. It's got the visceral fat link, and it degrades your sleep, which again, we've just talked about earlier in this video. Okay. Now, everything that we've gone through in this video, it stacks. It layers on each other and it builds over weeks. But for some people, this isn't enough. So, what if you want to lose visceral fat faster and if you want to break through any barriers that you might be encountering? Well, now there are medical options and it works by removing the exact thing that this whole video is about, the hunger. So I held on to this at the end on purpose because I do not want this to be the headline. Diet, exercise, and sleep, they always come first. But if lifestyle isn't enough, right, there's now a genuinely fast, powerful option. And again, this is not an issue of willpower. This is making sure that we're optimizing pathways properly to help you get the results that you want. You know, so the medications that I'm talking about here are GLP-1 medications. So I'm sure you've heard of them about semaglutide to zepatide umpic. They all in a way work by killing hunger. Here's how directly. When researchers measured how much people actually ate when they were using semaglutide compared to a placebo, the intake dropped by more than a third because they were less hungry and felt fuller. And they too work, right? So in a main trial of semaglutide, people lost about 15% of their body weight compared to 2% on a placebo. Now, crucially, both of these groups had diet and exercise in food. This is definitely not a replacement for lifestyle. But here's the part that really matters for this video. These drugs, they don't seem to just cut weight. They seem to cut visceral fat preferentially. So in a study of peptide visceral fat, it fell by about 40% while total fat fell far. Less meaning that the deep belly fat it seemed to come up faster than the rest. Okay. There's a second family of medications that I do want to mention as well, Sargent 2 inhibitors. Now, these are used for diabetics and for heart conditions and also for chronic kidney disease. But they also shrink visceral fat, and in particular, they can shrink the fat around the heart while preserving muscle. So those are the benefits. What are the side effects of these medications? Well, in any weight loss strategy, there's always a risk of losing muscle mass. And that's the same here with GLP-1 medications. Now, we can combat this through resistance exercise, which we've talked about already, and getting enough protein, which is why those lifestyle factors that we went through in the video at the start is so critical. None of this is a replacement for that. Another common side effect is nausea. Now, most people, the nausea goes away as you continue to use the medications. And this is why we generally start at a low dose and slowly build people up over time. There was a concern about pancreatitis and thyroid cancer, but the real world data here is really reassuring. SGLT2 inhibitors specifically, they can cause serious genital infections, but this is quite rare, and it generally only happens in test break 1 diabetics, which is why these medications are generally not used. Yeah, they're contraindicated for type 1 diabetics. Overall, we can lose visceral fat without feeling hungry by changing what we eat, fitting in exercise into our busy routines, prioritizing sleep, and using medications when lifestyle isn't enough. This is not a willpower problem. This is a biology problem. Now, speaking of GLP-1 medications, there's emerging evidence that these medications may help to regrow cartilage